Crops are very hungry plants. They've been bred by people over hundreds, thousands of years to produce big grains and seeds and roots and leaves and stems and fruit, and at the expense of their resilience and also their nutrient needs. They need a lot more nutrients than the average wild plant. And so that's why gardeners amend their soil. And there are lots of different ways to do that, but one of the main ways that we use in organic gardening is through adding compost. And there are lots of different types of compost, and my favorite is aged manure. And you'll have seen me use it in the allotment for years. And now that we're building the new beds at our new home, I'm bringing in lots of it to help create those beds. So what I'd like to talk to you today is a little bit more about what aged manure is, its benefits, and also things that you should look out for. Let's have a walk down to the bottom of the garden because I've just had 2 deliveries of partially composted horse manure delivered, and it's a big pile of poo. It doesn't smell that bad because it has been partially composted, and I'm sure that the neighbors will thank me for that. But we're not going to be using this just yet. We're going to be creating some compost bays over there and aging it over the winter. Now, incidentally, this is the exact same manure that we use at the allotment. It's the same equestrian center, the same delivery guy. Let's walk back up and have a look at the aged manure though. And you can see the pallets over there. Those are going to be used to create the first of those bays to put that new delivery of manure in. We've used quite a lot of this delivery in creating the new beds. There's 4. We'll get over there in a second. But first, let's have a look at this. It's much darker in color than the new stuff, and it's been composted, which means that it has been aged, but it's also been manually turned. And what you have here is pretty much black gold, and I've paid a fair penny for it as well. And it is nutrient rich, very similar in ways to garden compost. And it's just so much easier for me to get a hold of. Of course, I do make garden compost, but there's only so much that I can make a year. And so I do rely on aged manure as my main compost for no-dig beds. The last time that I brought you over to the side of the garden, I had just created that top raised bed. I say raised bed, it's literally just a no-dig bed that is surrounded by wood to keep the contents in because I am on a slope. And I have a full video sharing exactly how I created it. It was dead easy, no digging required as the technique suggests. The compost inside is the same stuff that we just had a look at. This is composted horse manure. And there are quite a few benefits to using it in the garden. First of all, it is filled with more than just nutrients. It's filled with a lot of organic matter that helps to condition and bulk out the soil. And even as a top dressing or as a mulch, worms will bring it back down into the soil. It doesn't just stay on the surface. And the NPK is very similar to homemade garden compost, but it also has minerals in it like calcium and magnesium, which plants need as well. And another way that it's really beneficial is that horses produce a lot of waste. So using the manure and bedding and composting it and using it in gardening and using it in farming helps to make use out of a good, oftentimes free material, and helps to create a productive organic garden. Aside from using aged and composted manure to create no-dig beds, how else can we use it in the garden? Well, The beds at the allotment did not start off their life as no-dig beds. I dug them over years ago, and I dug manure, so composted manure, in. And that is a very traditional way of using manure. And in fact, this time of the year, you'll see a lot of vegetable growers doing that. I converted those beds over to no-dig a few years ago, for the most part. And instead what I do is I use that compost, and I use that composted manure on the surface. So that's all I do every year is I top dress the beds with about 1 inch of compost and composted manure, and I let that sit. It gets pulled down into the soil by worms and other actions, and that's all I do. I have an entire video talking about the benefits of gardening that way, so head over there and watch that if you want to learn a little bit more. On that same note, you can use a top dressing of manure on your container plants, especially hungry perennial plants that are going to be living in pots for a long time. And soil and potting mix, compost in containers depletes a lot quicker than soil out in the garden. So top dressing with just a little bit of composted horse manure will help to replenish those nutrients. There are some things that you do need to watch out for with manure and using it in the garden. First of all, you shouldn't use fresh manure in the garden. It can contain weed seeds, it can contain pathogens and parasites that were inside the animal, and it can also burn plants. The high nutrient levels and the salts in manure that's fresh can burn and harm your plants. If you do use a hot composting method, you can add manure to your compost. But if you use the easy cold composting method, which I tend to use, and you'll see it in action over at this compost area, and also in my video showing how to make easy compost, it doesn't really get warm enough to kill off weed seeds. And so I wouldn't add it to that type of compost. Another thing that you do need to watch out for with horse manure in general, both fresh and composted, is a type of herbicide, aminopyralid herbicide. And farmers and other people use different chemicals on grass that will kill off some types of plants but leave the grass growing. And these are called broadleaf herbicides. And one of them, aminopyralid herbicide, persists. So that means it's sprayed over grass or a crop that is grown for hay for animals. All the plants die off except for the grass, which is then harvested, dried. Horses and cattle and other types of livestock eat it. It passes right through and it stays in the compost. So that means that when you put it onto your garden beds, any plants that are affected by that herbicide, which include tomatoes are a big one, they can die and get all kinds of deformities, and you don't really know what's going on. But that is something to consider when you use manure in the garden. I want to take you back to the fresh manure though, because I want to tell you a little bit more about it and why I trust it. This pile of partially composted horse manure makes me so happy because it was 1/3 the price of the other stuff that I brought in. Although that is amazing, well-aged and composted manure, this is just a lot more affordable. And it is the exact same manure from the exact same equestrian center that I get for the allotment, which we've been using for years. And I understand from the owner of that equestrian center that they use organic bedding, they use organic horse feed, they're aware of the aminopyralid issue. And so of all the horse manure that I could use, I trust this the most, which you can't really say for even purchased potting mixes and compost these days, because every year people run into this issue of buying bagged compost, using it, and their plants suffering. As you can see, those no-dig beds are over there in the distance, and there's all of this space and more that is going to become garden space. And so manure helps me to be able to create compost in bulk and create an organic garden fairly inexpensively. If I had to buy in all of that aged manure or make compost, it would take me a lot of time. I'd have to bring in a lot of materials, and it could take a lot of money. And I have plans for this. I've got fruit trees on the way. In November, I'm going to be putting in some fruit trees, and this is going to be a bit of an orchard area. And having compost made out of manure is going to help me get those established and keep them fed for years to come. So while there are some things that you need to be aware of and to look out for, overall, I would say that composted, aged farmyard manure or horse manure is a great option for your gardens. And I've been using it for years. And I know that it comes from happy, healthy horses at a local equestrian center. And it helps me to have an inexpensive, reduced waste type of material to use on my organic garden. And the manure back there that I've just had delivered, after a winter or even just a few months of sitting in a pile, it's going to be black gold, ready to be used in the garden in the same way as the more expensive finished product that I've had to order in. If you've got any questions about using manure or composting, leave them as a comment down below. And if you want to learn a little bit more about how I use surface mulches, I've got a couple of videos, which I'll put in the video description. And also do check out that video of creating the first no-dig bed, because it is so simple. It really does work. You don't have to dig over soil to create a bountiful garden. And Josh and I put in a lot of work in creating those additional 3. It's a drop in the bucket when it comes to the size of our house and our garden now. So having a quick way to create organic garden beds is going to be a way for me to get through this garden relatively quickly. Digging it over is not an option. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time here on Lovely Greens. Bye for now.